Full story. My parents saw my wine collection and decided I was an alcoholic who needed to give. My name is Penelope, and I just turned 32 last month. Since I was 25, I've been collecting fine wines. It became my passion after my first wine tasting tour in Napa Valley. I worked so hard to buy my dream house with the perfect wine cellar. When my parents and brother Jackson came to visit, I was excited to show them everything, especially my collection. I never expected their faces to change like that. Mom started crying. Dad got angry. Suddenly, they were convinced I was an alcoholic who needed help, and somehow that meant giving my house to my brother. If only they knew where that decision would lead. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button. If you've ever had your family completely misunderstand something important to you, subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics gone wrong and how I managed to turn things around. Wine has been my passion since my mid-20s. I remember the exact moment I fell in love with wine culture. I was 25, fresh out of graduate school with my MBA, and my friend Tara invited me on a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Before that trip, I knew nothing about wine except that it came in red and white varieties. The first vineyard we visited changed everything. The sommelier was this charming older gentleman named Arthur, who had been in the industry for over 40 years. He didn't just pour wine into glasses. He told stories. Each wine had a history, a personality, nuances that connected to the soil, the weather, the hands that tended the grapes. I was captivated. "This Cabernet," Arthur had said, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass, "spent 3 years in French oak barrels. Can you taste the vanilla notes, the hint of tobacco that comes from the barrel aging process?" I remember closing my eyes and taking a sip, really focusing on the flavors for the first time in my life. And there they were, vanilla, tobacco, dark cherries, and something earthy I couldn't quite name. It was like discovering a new language, one that spoke directly to my senses. By the end of that weekend, I had signed up for a 6-week wine appreciation course back home in Portland. Within 6 months, I had earned my Level 1 sommelier certification just for my own knowledge. I never intended to work in the industry, but the education deepened my appreciation. My career in marketing for luxury brands gave me a comfortable income, and I started allocating part of my monthly budget to building a proper collection. I was methodical about it, researching regions, vintages, reading reviews from respected critics. This wasn't about drinking. It was about appreciating craftsmanship, understanding history, and yes, making some smart investments. Over the years, my collection grew to about 50 bottles of carefully selected wines. Some were drinking beautifully now. Others were meant to age for special occasions. My pride and joy was a 2009 Chateau Margaux that cost me almost $1,000 a splurge for my 30th birthday. I planned to open it on my 40th or perhaps my wedding day, whichever came first. As my collection grew, so did my dream of having a proper place to store it. My apartment wasn't ideal. Temperature fluctuations could ruin good wine. I needed a house with space for a proper cellar. That became my goal. For 7 years, I worked tirelessly. I took on extra consulting projects, saved aggressively, limited my vacations, and lived well below my means. Dating took a back seat to career advancement. I was promoted twice, each time negotiating salary increases rather than settling for the initial offers. When I finally found the perfect house, a charming craftsman with 3 bedrooms and a basement that could be converted to a wine cellar, I was ready. I had saved enough for a substantial down payment, and my credit score was excellent. The real estate market had dipped slightly, putting the house within my budget. It felt like the universe was finally rewarding my patience and discipline. The previous owners had already partially finished the basement, which made the conversion to a wine cellar more affordable. I invested in proper insulation, temperature control systems, and custom racks. Nothing extravagantly expensive, but well-designed and functional. The cellar could hold up to 200 bottles, room for my collection to grow over the decades. Through all of this, my family remained somewhat distant from my passion. We had always been different, my parents and I. They were practical, conservative people who viewed any luxury as wasteful. Dad worked for 40 years as an insurance adjuster, and Mom was an elementary school teacher. They saved carefully, took modest vacations, and considered splurging to be buying name-brand cereal instead of the store brand. My brother Jackson was different in his own way. Where I was ambitious and focused, Jackson seemed to drift. He was 3 years younger than me and had never quite found his footing in adulthood. He had attended community college sporadically but never finished his degree. His employment history was a patchwork of jobs that never lasted longer than a year, retail positions, restaurant work, a brief stint in construction. What concerned me most was his tendency to lean heavily on our parents. At 29, he still lived in their basement rent-free. Dad had bailed him out of financial trouble multiple times, including paying off a maxed-out credit card and covering the costs after Jackson got a DUI when he was 25. Despite our differences, I had fond memories of our childhood together. Jackson had been my adventure buddy, always ready to explore the woods behind our house or build elaborate blanket forts on rainy days. We had drifted apart in high school when I focused on academics, and he fell in with a party crowd. By the time I left for college, we were essentially living parallel lives under the same roof. I had invited my parents to visit my new house several times during the 6 months after I moved in, but they always had excuses. Mom's book club, Dad's bowling night, a cousin's baby shower. I tried not to take it personally. They had never been particularly involved in my adult life, rarely visiting me in Portland, despite living just 3 hours away in Seattle. The opportunity to finally host them came after my housewarming party. It was a small gathering, just a dozen close friends for dinner and wine. My friend Sarah, who had always been close to her own family, asked why mine wasn't there. "They couldn't make it," I said, trying to sound casual. "Have they seen your new place at all?" she pressed. When I admitted they hadn't, she looked genuinely shocked. "Penelope, you have to insist they visit. This is huge, your first house. Send them specific dates. Make it impossible for them to say no." Taking Sarah's advice, I called my mom the next day and didn't ask if they wanted to visit. I told them I was expecting them the following Saturday at noon for lunch and a house tour. To my surprise, she agreed and even said they would bring Jackson along. I spent the entire week preparing. I cleaned, obsessively planned a lunch menu that accommodated everyone's preferences and even bought the brand of coffee my dad preferred despite not drinking it myself. I wanted everything to be perfect. I was finally going to share my accomplishment with my family, and I hoped they would be proud. Little did I know that day would change everything between us, setting in motion events I could never have imagined. The morning my family was set to arrive, I was up at dawn. I baked fresh bread, prepared a spinach salad, and slow-cooked a pot of my mom's favorite beef stew recipe. I wanted the house to feel warm and inviting, to smell like the home we'd all shared years ago. At precisely noon, their car pulled into my driveway. Dad was always punctual to a fault. I watched through the front window as they stepped out, Dad in his usual flannel shirt and khakis, Mom in a floral blouse and cardigan. Jackson emerged last, looking slightly rumpled, as if he'd just woken up wearing jeans and a faded band t-shirt I didn't recognize. I opened the door before they could knock. "Welcome," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. Come in." Mom hugged me first. "The house looks beautiful from outside, honey. Those blue shutters are just darling." Dad gave me a quick, somewhat awkward side hug. He had never been demonstrative with his affection. "Place looks solid. Good neighborhood, too." Jackson hung back hands in his pockets. "Hey, sis. Nice digs." His eyes were already scanning the entryway, taking in the hardwood floors and high ceilings. I ushered them into the living room where I'd set out coffee and cookies as a pre-lunch snack. Mom immediately commented on the built-in bookshelves and the original crown molding. Dad examined the windows, checking for drafts with his hand, as he'd always done in every house we'd ever lived in. "Is this real hardwood?" he asked, tapping the floor with his foot. "Yes, original to the house. I had it refinished when I moved in. He nodded, seemingly impressed. Good investment. None of that laminate stuff that needs replacing every few years. The conversation flowed surprisingly well as we moved to the dining room for lunch. Mom praised the stew, saying it was even better than hers. Jackson ate 3 helpings without contributing much to the conversation. Dad asked sensible questions about the mortgage rate, property taxes, and whether I'd had the foundation inspected. After lunch, I gave them the tour, starting with the main floor, the cozy living room with its original fireplace, the updated kitchen with its butcher block countertops, the sunny home office where I worked remotely 2 days a week. Upstairs, I showed them the master bedroom with its attached bath, the guest room I'd set up with fresh linens in case they ever wanted to stay over, and the second smaller bedroom I was using as a craft and reading room. Throughout the tour, their reactions were positive. Mom loved the clawfoot tub in the bathroom. Dad approved of the new water heater and updated electrical panel. Jackson seemed particularly interested in the security system I'd had installed, asking detailed questions about how it worked. I saved the basement wine cellar for last, thinking of it as the grand finale. In my mind, it represented the culmination of years of hard work, discipline, and passion. I was proud of what I'd created, both the physical space and the collection it housed. And now for my favorite part of the house, I said, leading them down the stairs. I had this specially renovated. I opened the door to the cellar with a flourish, switching on the subtle recessed lighting that illuminated the bottles in their wooden racks. The temperature control unit hummed quietly in the corner, maintaining the perfect 55 degrees. My pride and joy, the Chateau Margaux, was displayed in a small spotlight section with a few other special bottles. The silence that followed wasn't the impressed pause I had expected. It was heavy, uncomfortable. I turned around to see 3 very different expressions. Dad's face had hardened, his jaw set in a way I recognized from childhood scoldings. Mom's hand had flown to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like horror. Jackson, standing behind them, had an odd expression, concern mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. All this is yours? Mom finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I said, confused by their reaction. It's my collection. I've been building it for years. Dad stepped into the room, scanning the racks. How many bottles are here? About 50 now, but the space can hold up to 200 eventually. I designed it to 200 bottles of alcohol. Dad interrupted, his voice flat. For one person. I laughed nervously. Well, it's not for drinking all at once. Some of these will age for years. It's an investment, really. Like art. Investment. Dad repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Penelope, this is concerning. Mom was now wiping away actual tears. I never thought... Not you, Penelope. You were always so responsible. I looked between them, completely bewildered. What are you talking about? This is a wine collection. Lots of people collect wine. Alcoholics collect alcohol, Dad said bluntly. The word hit me like a physical blow. Alcoholic? That's ridiculous. I'm not an alcoholic. This isn't about drinking, it's about appreciating fine wine. It's a hobby, a passion. Mom moved toward me, placing a trembling hand on my arm. Honey, no one needs this much alcohol unless they have a problem. Remember Uncle Philip, your father's brother? I shook my head. I never met Uncle Philip. Exactly, she said meaningfully. He died before you were born. Cirrhosis of the liver at 42. He started just like this, appreciating fine whiskeys, he called it. A collector, he said. Jackson finally spoke up, his voice gentle with concern that now seemed exaggerated. Sis, I had no idea you were struggling with this. How much do you drink daily? This isn't... I stammered, feeling ambushed from all sides. I maybe have a glass with dinner sometimes. This isn't about drinking some of these bottles I've had for years unopened. Stockpiling. Dad said grimly. That's what addicts do. They hide stashes. I'm not hiding anything. I literally just showed you my collection. The conversation deteriorated from there. Every explanation I offered was twisted into further evidence of my supposed alcoholism. My knowledge of wine regions and vintages became obsession. The money I'd spent became financial irresponsibility driven by addiction. The pride I took in the cellar became building my life around alcohol. Mom was now fully crying. We should have seen the signs. All those years living alone in the city, the way you never brought anyone serious home. We thought you were just focused on your career. I was focused on my career, I protested, feeling increasingly desperate. That's how I could afford this house. Jackson put his arm around Mom's shoulders. It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out together. Penelope needs our help now. I looked at him sharply. There was something in his tone that felt off, almost rehearsed. But before I could challenge him, Dad announced that they needed to leave. We need time to process this, he said firmly. And you need to do some serious thinking about your choices, young lady. They filed up the stairs, Mom still sniffling Dad, stern and silent Jackson throwing one last concerned glance over his shoulder. The warm family lunch had transformed into a cold, awkward departure. No hugs goodbye, just Mom saying they would be in touch soon about next steps, whatever that meant. As I watched their car pull away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, hurt, indignation, and a creeping sense of dread about what next steps might entail. For the next week, I tried to process what had happened during my family's visit. I replayed the scene in the wine cellar over and over, still baffled by their reaction. Had I missed something? Was there a history of alcoholism in our family I hadn't been aware of? But even if there was, surely they could see the difference between collecting wine and having a drinking problem. I sent my mom a few articles about wine collecting as an investment and hobby, hoping to educate them. She responded with links to Alcoholics Anonymous and a recovery center in Portland. When I called to try to have a reasonable conversation, Dad answered and said they were giving me space to reflect on my problem. He hung up before I could argue. 7 days after their visit, I received a text message from my mother. Family meeting at our house this Saturday at 2 p.m. Very important you attend. We've found a solution. Something about the phrasing sent a chill down my spine. A solution implied they still believed there was a problem to solve, but I agreed to go, hoping I could finally make them understand. That Saturday, I made the 3-hour drive to Seattle with a knot in my stomach. When I arrived at my parents' modest suburban home, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway alongside my brother's beat-up Honda. Mom answered the door with a tight smile. Come in, dear. Everyone's waiting in the living room. I followed her through the familiar hallway past the gallery of family photos that hadn't been updated since Jackson's high school graduation. In the living room, Dad sat in his recliner, looking grave. Jackson occupied one end of the sofa, and in the armchair near the window was a stranger, a balding man in his 50s wearing a sweater vest and glasses. Penelope, Dad said formally. This is Dr. Thompson. He's an addiction specialist who's here to help us today. The man stood and offered his hand. Ms. Walsh, thank you for coming. Your family is very concerned about you. I didn't take his hand. There's nothing to be concerned about. I don't have an addiction. Denial is very common, Dr. Thompson said smoothly, sitting back down. Why don't you have a seat so we can talk? I remained standing. What exactly is happening here? Mom touched my arm gently. It's an intervention, sweetie, because we love you. The word hit me like ice water. An intervention. Are you serious? Because I collect wine? Because you've dedicated an entire room of your house to alcohol storage, Dad corrected. Because you've spent thousands of dollars on alcohol. Because you live alone and have built your life around this habit. Dr. Thompson has experience with high-functioning alcoholics, Mom added, as if this were reassuring. People who maintain careers and appear successful while hiding their addiction. I turned to the supposed doctor. Have you ever treated wine collectors specifically? Do you understand the difference between appreciation and addiction? He smiled condescendingly. Ms. Walsh, in my 20 years of practice, I've found that connoisseurship is often a mask for dependency. The terminology and rituals around fine wines, whiskeys, or craft beers become justifications for keeping alcohol central to one's life. That's ridiculous, I snapped. By that logic, every sommelier, winery owner, and restaurant wine director in America needs an intervention. We're not here to debate, Dad interjected. We're here because we care about you and we have a plan to help. I've recommended a 30-day inpatient program, Dr. Thompson said, opening a folder on his lap. The Lakeside Recovery Center has an excellent success rate and offers a holistic approach to— Absolutely not, I interrupted. I am not going to rehab for a problem I don't have. This is insane. Jackson leaned forward, his expression earnest. Penelope, please just listen. We've thought this through. The program is really good and insurance might even cover part of it. And what about my job, my house, my life? Am I supposed to just put everything on hold for a month because of your bizarre misunderstanding? This was where my father cleared his throat. That's the other part of the plan. While you're getting treatment, we think it would be best if you temporarily sign over the house to Jackson. The room went silent. I stared at my father, certain I had misheard him. Excuse me? Just temporarily, Mom rushed to add. As a precaution. A precaution against what? Dad shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Thompson has explained that people with addiction problems sometimes make financial decisions they later regret, selling assets to fund their habit. You think I'm going to sell my house for wine money? I was practically shouting now. The house I spent 7 years saving for. Dr. Thompson nodded solemnly. It's more common than you might think. Addiction escalates, expenses increase. Having a family member as custodian of major assets during early recovery can prevent impulsive decisions. I turned to Jackson, who was studying his hands intently. And you're okay with this plan? Moving into my house while I'm locked away in rehab? He looked up, his expression a perfect mask of reluctance and concern. I don't want to, sis. But someone needs to look after the place, make sure everything's okay. I'd just be the caretaker until you're better. Something clicked then, the way he'd examined every room during the tour, his interest in the security system, the odd expression when he'd seen the wine cellar. This wasn't concern. This was calculation. This is unbelievable, I said, looking from face to face. You're trying to take my house based on a completely fabricated addiction. Do you hear yourselves? We hear someone who isn't ready to admit she needs help, Dad said firmly. I grabbed my purse from where I'd set it on the coffee table. This meeting is over. I'm not going to any rehab, and I'm certainly not signing my house over to anyone. Penelope, please. Mom begged, tears welling in her eyes again. If you won't do the inpatient program, at least consider outpatient treatment. Dr. Thompson can refer you. Dr. Thompson can mind his own business, I snapped, heading for the door. And so can all of you. When you're ready to apologize for this insanity, you know where to find me. In my house, which belongs to me. As I reached the door, my father called after me. This isn't over, Penelope. If you won't accept our help voluntarily, there are other ways to organize an intervention. Legal ways. The threat hung in the air as I slammed the door behind me. The weeks following that disastrous family meeting were some of the most stressful of my life. It began with a barrage of phone calls and messages, not just from my immediate family, but from aunts, uncles, and family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, my parents had spread the word that I was struggling with alcoholism and refusing help. My phone would ring, and I'd answer to hear Aunt Susan's concerned voice. Penelope, dear, I just want you to know I'm here for you. My neighbor's son went through something similar, and there's no shame in asking for help. Or I'd get a text from my dad's bowling buddy. Your father is so worried about you. We all are. Please reconsider treatment. Each time I tried to explain the truth, but I could hear the doubt in their responses. In their minds, denial was just confirming my addiction. It was like trying to prove I wasn't crazy in a mental institution. Every protest was interpreted as a symptom. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I blocked several relatives on social media after they left supportive comments about recovery on my photos. I felt isolated and betrayed, painted as an addict by the people who should have known me best. What bothered me most was that no one had actually asked about my drinking habits. Not my parents, not Dr. not Thompson. Not any of the concerned relatives. No one had inquired whether I drank daily, if I drank alone, if alcohol affected my work or relationships, the actual indicators of a problem. They had seen bottles in racks and jumped straight to intervention. About 10 days after the family meeting, Jackson showed up at my house unannounced. When I opened the door, he stood there with a paper bag from a local bakery and a sheepish expression. Peace offering, he said, holding up the bag. Blueberry muffins, your favorite. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Despite everything, he was still my brother, and part of me hoped he might be the one family member willing to listen to reason. Nice to see you're not passed out drunk at 10 in the morning, he joked as he entered, then immediately winced. Sorry, bad joke. Not funny, I agreed, taking the bag and leading him to the kitchen. I put on coffee and set out the muffins more out of ingrained hospitality than genuine welcome. So, I said when we were seated at the kitchen island. Did Mom and Dad send you to convince me about rehab? Jackson shook his head. I'm here on my own. I'm worried about you, sure, but I also thought maybe we could talk without all the drama. The intervention thing was intense. It was absurd, I corrected, and humiliating, and based on absolutely nothing. I wouldn't say nothing, he countered, gesturing vaguely toward where he knew the cellar was located. That's a lot of alcohol, sis. It's a collection, Jackson. A hobby, an investment. Do you call someone who collects baseball cards a baseball addict? He shrugged. I'm just saying how it looks to us, especially with Uncle Philip's history. The uncle I never even met, the one no one ever talked about until now. Yeah, well, it was painful for Dad. They were close. We fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of coffee mugs on the countertop. How have you been, anyway? I asked eventually. Still at the warehouse job? A shadow crossed his face. Nah, that ended a couple months ago. Budget cuts. I'm between things right now. I'm sorry to hear that. And I was, despite everything. Are you looking for something new? Yeah, putting in applications. It's tough out there. He took a bite of muffin, then added casually. Actually, that's partly why I thought the house idea wasn't terrible. Would give me a stable place while I'm job hunting. And like I said, I'd just be watching it for you temporarily. There it was. I studied my brother's face, noticing the calculated way he'd brought the conversation around to the house. So, you're still on board with their plan. Take my house while I'm in rehab for an addiction I don't have. When you put it like that, it sounds bad, he admitted. But it's coming from a place of concern. And it would help me out too. Win-win. Except it's not a win for me to lose my house and my reputation. Jackson stayed for almost an hour. As we talked, I noticed him glancing around the kitchen, taking in details, the new appliances, the renovated cabinets. At one point, he asked to use the bathroom and was gone longer than seemed necessary. After he left, I felt uneasy. Something about his visit didn't sit right. Acting on instinct, I checked the drawer, where I kept some of my house documents. Everything seemed in order, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been doing more than using the bathroom. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later when I came home from work early due to a canceled meeting. As I turned onto my street, I saw Jackson's Honda parked outside my house, along with another car I didn't recognize. I parked a few houses down and watched as Jackson emerged from my front door, accompanied by a middle-aged woman in a business suit. They appeared to be in deep conversation as they stood on my porch. I waited until the woman got in her car and drove away before I approached. Jackson was just about to get in his own vehicle when he spotted me walking up the sidewalk. "Penelope," he exclaimed, his face draining of color. "I thought you'd be at work." "Clearly," I said icily. "Who was that woman, and why are you showing her my house?" Just a friend who's into architecture. She wanted to see the original craftsman details." "Really? Your friend dresses like a real estate agent for casual house tours?" Jackson's facade crumbled quickly under direct questioning. He admitted the woman was indeed a real estate agent he'd been consulting about the potential market value of my house. "Just gathering information," he insisted, "in case we need to make decisions down the road." "We don't need to make any decisions about my house," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And you need to give me your key right now. Mom and Dad gave me that key for emergencies. This is the last time I'm asking nicely. Give me the key, Jackson." Reluctantly, he handed over the spare key I'd given my parents years ago. As he did, I noticed something else, a flash of purple tissue paper poking out of his jacket pocket. "Empty your pockets," I demanded. "Come on, Penelope, you're being paranoid. Now." With obvious reluctance, he pulled out the tissue-wrapped object. It was one of my wine bottles, a 2012 Barolo that was worth about $400. "Are you serious?" I snatched it from him. "You're stealing from me now." "I wasn't stealing," he protested. "I was just borrowing it to show a friend who's into wine. I was going to bring it back." "Get off my property," I said, clutching the bottle. "And don't come back. Ever." As he hurried to his car, I called after him. "And tell Mom and Dad that if any of you try to enter my house again, I'll call the police." It was an empty threat. At that moment, I had no proof of anything criminal, but the look of alarm on Jackson's face told me I'd struck a nerve. That evening, I sat in my living room with a legal pad mapping out what I knew and what I suspected. The intervention, the sudden concern about alcoholism, the push to get me into rehab, the plan for Jackson to take over my house, it all seemed too coordinated, too convenient, especially with Jackson's job loss and his obvious interest in the house's value. I needed professional advice, and I needed it fast. First thing the next morning, I called my friend Lauren, who happened to be a family law attorney. "I need your help," I told her. "I think my family is trying to scam me out of my house." Lauren and I met for lunch that day at a quiet cafe far from my office where we wouldn't run into colleagues. As I laid out everything that had happened since my family's visit, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "This is disturbing on multiple levels," she said when I finished. "They're essentially trying to gaslight you into doubting your own relationship with alcohol, then use that doubt to separate you from your property." "Can they actually do that?" I asked. "Legally, I mean. Force me into rehab or take my house?" She tapped her fork against her plate thoughtfully. "Involuntary commitment for substance abuse is extremely difficult to achieve legally. They would need to prove you're a danger to yourself or others, not just someone with a wine collection. As for the house, unless you sign something, or they get power of attorney over you, somehow they can't touch it." "Power of attorney? How would they get that?" "If they could prove you're mentally incompetent or unable to make sound decisions for yourself. But again, that's a high legal bar to clear. A wine collection isn't evidence of incompetence." Her words were reassuring, but I couldn't shake my unease. "Jackson was in my house with a real estate agent. He took one of my expensive bottles. What if he takes more? Or what if they try something else?" Lauren's expression turned serious. First, change your locks immediately, today. Second, install security cameras if you don't already have them. Document everything, every call, text, email from family members about this issue. And third, look into this, Dr. Thompson. Something feels off about his involvement. I followed Lauren's advice to the letter. That afternoon, I had a locksmith change every lock in the house. I ordered a comprehensive security camera system with both indoor and outdoor coverage, making sure one camera had a clear view of the wine cellar. And I began a detailed journal of every interaction related to this situation. My investigation into Dr. Thompson proved enlightening. A simple Google search revealed no addiction specialist by that name in the Seattle area. There was a marriage counselor named Thomas Thompson, but no one matching the credentials of the man I'd met. When I searched the licensing board records, I found no Dr. Thompson registered as a substance abuse counselor or psychiatrist. I called Lauren with this information. "He's not a real doctor," I told her. "At least not the kind they claimed he was." "That's a significant development," she said. "It suggests this whole intervention was a sham from the beginning." Over the next few days, the security cameras proved their worth. Twice, Jackson drove by my house slowly, apparently checking if I was home. Once, he actually came to the door and tried his key, now useless with the new locks. The camera caught his look of frustration clearly. The situation escalated when I received an automated notification from my bank about a change of address request on my account. I hadn't requested any change. When I called the bank, they confirmed someone had attempted to update my mailing address online, but had been stopped by the security verification process. The attempt came from an IP address in Seattle, the bank representative told me. The same city where my parents and brother lived. Then came the most damning evidence of all. My security system alerted me to movement in the house while I was at work. The footage showed Jackson using what appeared to be a duplicate key to enter through the back door, a key he must have made before returning my original spare. The cameras tracked his movements through the house. He went directly to the wine cellar, where he selected 2 more expensive bottles. Then he proceeded to my home office and began rifling through my desk drawers, eventually finding my folder of house documents. He took several papers out, photographed them with his phone, then replaced them, and left. I called the police immediately, reporting a break-in and theft. When officers arrived, I showed them the security footage. They took a report but explained that because Jackson had a key, even if it was a duplicate made without permission and was my brother, they considered it a family matter rather than a clear case of breaking and entering. "Change your locks again," one officer advised. "And if you want to pursue charges for the wine, you'll need to file a formal complaint." It was frustrating, but not entirely surprising. What the officers didn't know, what I had just discovered myself when checking my documents, was that among the papers Jackson had photographed was a power of attorney form. It was blank, but the implications were chilling. Were they planning to forge my signature, to claim I had willingly given Jackson control over my affairs? I moved all my important documents to a safe deposit box at the bank the next day. I also hired a private investigator recommended by Lauren to look into Jackson's recent activities and financial situation. The PI's report came back faster than expected and painted a troubling picture. Jackson had accumulated significant gambling debts at several casinos within driving distance of Seattle. He had maxed out 3 credit cards and taken out 2 payday loans in the past 6 months. He had also been evicted from an apartment about a year earlier before moving back in with our parents. "He's desperate for money," Lauren concluded when I shared the report with her. "And your house represents a potential gold mine for him, either by living there rent-free or by selling it." "But my parents, why would they go along with this scheme? They might not know the full extent of his plan. He could have convinced them your drinking is a genuine problem, playing on their concerns about this Uncle Philip. They might think they're really helping you." It made a certain sad sense. My parents had always been susceptible to Jackson's manipulation, always ready to see him as the struggling child who needed extra support, and me as the capable one who could handle herself. 2 weeks after Jackson's break-in, Lauren called me with alarming news. One of my colleagues was at the county clerk's office and saw something concerning. There's a power of attorney document that was recently filed naming Jackson as your attorney, in fact. It has what appears to be your signature. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. I know. It's a forgery and a criminal offense. We immediately filed a fraud report and a petition to invalidate the document. But even as we fought this battle on the legal front, I knew Jackson might be taking other actions. He now believed he had legal control over my affairs. What might he try next? The answer came all too soon. Lauren and I devised a plan. With the cooperation of a local detective who took an interest in the case, after seeing the forged document, we set a trap. I announced on social media that I was going to be out of town for a long weekend wine tasting event in Oregon. In reality, I would be staying with Lauren while police kept watch on my house. Sure enough, on Friday night, Jackson took the bait. The security system alerted us when he entered the house this time with a small moving dolly and empty wine boxes. His intention was clear. He planned to clean out the entire wine cellar. Police officers who had been waiting nearby moved in and caught him in the act. In his panic at being discovered, Jackson made the critical mistake of admitting everything, the fake intervention, the plan to get me into rehab so he could take the house, even the forged power of attorney. I just needed a break for once, he shouted as officers handcuffed him. Penelope always gets everything, the good grades, the great job, the perfect house. I'm drowning in debt, and she has a closet full of wine, worth more than I make in a year. His confession, captured on both police body cameras and my home security system, provided the evidence we needed. Jackson was arrested for burglary, attempted grand theft, and forgery. When my parents were notified of their son's arrest, their reaction was a mix of shock, disbelief, and shame. The officer who called them suggested they come to the station where I was giving my statement. That set the stage for the most difficult family confrontation of my life. The police station was brightly lit and smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat in a small interview room with Detective Rivera, who had taken a personal interest in my case after seeing the evidence of the forgery. We had just finished going through my statement when there was a knock at the door. Your parents are here, Detective Rivera said. Are you ready to see them? I took a deep breath and nodded. I wasn't sure what to expect, denial, anger, accusations, but what I saw when they entered broke my heart in a different way. My father, always so confident and authoritative, looked diminished. His shoulders hunched forward as if carrying a physical weight. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her hands clutching a wadded tissue. Where's Jackson? Were my father's first words. They said he's been arrested. Detective Rivera explained the charges calmly and professionally: burglary, attempted grand theft, forgery of legal documents. With each charge, my mother's quiet weeping grew more pronounced. There must be some mistake, my father insisted. Jackson was only trying to help Penelope with her problem. Mr. Walsh, the detective said firmly, there is no problem. Your daughter is not an alcoholic. She's a wine collector and investor. Your son admitted that he fabricated concerns about her drinking to manipulate you and to gain control of her property. That can't be right, Mom whispered. He was so worried about her, just like we were when we saw all those bottles. I finally spoke up. Did either of you ever actually ask me how much I drink? Or did you just see my collection and jump to conclusions? They exchanged uncomfortable glances but didn't answer. For the record, I continued, I typically have 1 glass of wine with dinner a few times a week. Sometimes none. I can't remember the last time I was even slightly drunk. My collection is an investment. Many of those bottles are worth 2 or 3 times what I paid for them. But Dr. Thompson said, Dad began. He's not a real doctor, I interrupted. Did you check his credentials? Because I did. There is no addiction specialist by that name registered in Washington State. Jackson found someone to play a role. This news hit them hard. Mom sank into a chair while Dad leaned against the wall for support. "Why would Jackson do this?" Mom asked, her voice small. Detective Rivera spoke up. "Your son has accumulated significant gambling debts. We found evidence on his phone of communications with creditors who were threatening him. It appears he saw Ms. Walsh's house and wine collection as a solution to his financial problems. He told you I needed rehab so he could take my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt and anger I felt. "And you believed him without question. You were willing to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized based on his word and a room full of wine bottles." "We thought we were helping you," Dad said weakly. "After what happened to my brother." "I'm not Uncle Philip," I said firmly. "I'm not an alcoholic. I'm your daughter, and you should have known me better than that. You should have trusted me enough to at least have a conversation before organizing an intervention with a fake doctor." The reality of the situation seemed to finally sink in. My mother's tears flowed freely now, and my father looked 20 years older than when he had entered the room. "Can we see Jackson?" Mom asked the detective. "He's being processed now. You can see him briefly before he's transferred to county custody." "Will he go to prison?" Dad asked, the words seeming to pain him physically. "That will be up to the district attorney and the court," Detective Rivera explained. "But forgery of legal documents and burglary are serious charges, and Ms. Walsh has very clear evidence including video footage and his own confession." My parents looked at me pleadingly, and I knew what they wanted for me to drop the charges to handle this as a family. Part of me wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. They had been willing to have me committed based on false accusations, but now wanted mercy for the son who had orchestrated the whole scheme. "I can't drop the charges," I said quietly. "What Jackson did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. He tried to steal my house, my collection, and my reputation. He forged legal documents with my name. He broke into my home multiple times." "But he's your brother," Mom pleaded. "Yes, he is, and you're my parents, but none of you treated me like family when you were planning to take everything I've worked for." The detective excused herself to give us privacy, and for nearly an hour we talked in that small room. Gradually, the full story emerged. Jackson had indeed planted the seed about my supposed drinking problem subtly at first, and then more directly after seeing my wine cellar. He had found the doctor through a gambling acquaintance who knew people willing to play such roles for a fee. He had convinced my parents that a quick, decisive intervention was necessary before I drank away my future. "We should have asked you directly," Dad admitted eventually. "But Jackson made it sound like confronting you would just make you defensive, that addicts always deny their problem." "That's how he manipulated you," I said, "by using your love and concern against you. Against me." When it was time for them to see Jackson, I declined to join them. I wasn't ready to face my brother yet, wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. Instead, I asked Lauren to drive me home. I needed space from my family to process everything that had happened. In the weeks that followed, the legal system moved forward with its proceedings against Jackson. The evidence was overwhelming, especially after investigators found the original power of attorney document in his apartment with practice sheets where he had been perfecting my signature. My parents tried to contact me several times, leaving voicemails and sending texts expressing their regret and asking to talk. I wasn't ready. The betrayal cut too deeply, the realization that they had been so quick to believe the worst about me, too painful to simply brush aside. 2 months after Jackson's arrest, he accepted a plea deal, 2 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, plus restitution for the stolen wine and legal fees. When I learned of the sentence, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what our family had become. It was around this time that I finally agreed to meet with my parents. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between Portland and Seattle. The conversation was difficult, tearful, and at times heated. They apologized profusely, admitting they had failed me as parents by not trusting me, not knowing me better, not questioning Jackson's claims. "I need you to understand something," I told them toward the end of our meeting. "I can forgive you eventually, but I'll never forget that you were willing to have me committed and take my house based on nothing but Jackson's word and your own assumptions. Trust has been broken here, and rebuilding it will take time." They nodded, accepting this harsh truth with the gravity it deserved. "And I won't be visiting Jackson in prison," I added. "At least, not anytime soon. What he did wasn't just a mistake or a bad decision. It was calculated, manipulative, and it would have destroyed my life if he had succeeded." "We understand," Dad said quietly. "We're still trying to come to terms with it ourselves." In the year that followed, I focused on healing and rebuilding. I joined a support group for people dealing with toxic family relationships, which helped me process my feelings of betrayal and establish healthier boundaries. I threw myself into my work, earning a promotion that came with enough of a raise to accelerate my mortgage payments. And yes, I continued to build my wine collection, refusing to let my family's actions taint my passion. I even completed an advanced sommelier course, deepening my knowledge and appreciation of the craft. My relationship with my parents slowly, tentatively improved. We began with occasional phone calls, then graduated to video chats. 6 months after our cafe meeting, they visited my home again, a very different visit from the first one. This time, they asked thoughtful questions about my collection, listened to my explanations about regions and vintages, and even participated in a tasting of some more affordable bottles I opened for the occasion. As for Jackson, I visited him in prison exactly once about 8 months into his sentence. The conversation was strained and brief. He offered apologies that sounded rehearsed and excuses that rang hollow. I left knowing that while he was my brother by blood, he would never again be part of my inner circle of trust. When I returned home from that prison visit, I opened my Chateau Margaux, the prized bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. This didn't feel like a celebration exactly, but it was a significant moment nonetheless. As I savored each sip of that exquisite wine, I reflected on everything I had learned about myself, about family, about trust, and betrayal. I had discovered my own strength in the face of manipulation. I had learned that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones with the people who are supposed to love you most. And I had realized that no one has the right to define who you are or what you value, not even family. That evening, as the last of the Chateau Margaux lingered on my palate, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for months. My home was truly mine again. My passion unapologetically embraced my future entirely in my own capable hands. Life would never be the same after what my family had done, but perhaps it could be something better, something built on authentic self-knowledge, carefully chosen relationships, and the courage to stand firmly in my own truth. How far would you go to protect something you've worked so hard for? Has someone in your life ever completely misunderstood something important to you? Share your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And remember, family should support your dreams, not try to take them from you.